The unknown god, seen in the beginning of Genshin Impact, is perhaps one of the most mysterious characters in the game. But ironically, it is due to this great enigma that surrounds her character that very few people go deep and figure out who this goddess actually is. Sure, if you Google it, you will find some theories explaining that the unknown god is Paimon, or that Kiana from Honkai Impact is the unknown god. And even though some do make sense, all these speculations have one thing in common: they do not go deeper than the game lets them. Today I am here to break this barrier and answer this question once and for all. Who is the unknown god? I have found incredible information on the unknown god based upon my research of mythology and history of our own world. In this video you will learn who this goddess actually is, the inspiration behind her character, and that the unknown god isn't as unknown as you might think. In fact, the identity of the unknown god might have been lying right beneath our noses all this time. The unknown god appears right in the start of the game, so I think every Genshin player is already aware of her. But just in case you forgot who she is, I will summarize the event for you. In the beginning of Genshin Impact, you and your sibling, travelers who travel from one world to another, are about to leave Tevat. However, they are stopped by an unknown god who calls herself the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles. This god does not want the two travelers to leave Tevat, and as such she battles them. Eventually, the Sustainer captures one of the siblings and steals the other away. After this chaotic event, your chosen sibling wakes up. They have lost all their power and sense of the time that has already passed. This is all we see and hear from the unknown god. There is no background to the events of the scene, and the god leaves as suddenly as she appears. However, believe it or not, those few minutes can actually give us a lot of information about her. Let us start by analyzing what she says exactly. More precisely, what did the unknown god mean with being the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles? You asked back then. What are these heavenly principles in the first place? We all still ask ourselves. We can figure that out by looking at Chinese theology. Chinese theology sees the world and the gods as an organic whole. So, in Genshin Impact, the world is Tevat and the gods are the deities of Celestia, including the Archons. This organic whole emerges from one principle. This principle is usually referred to as Tian. And no, I don't think that Ningguang has the title of Tianquan just for show, but I'll talk about that in a future video. This idea is often translated as heaven, and it refers to the laws of nature that control phenomena on Earth. So, what the unknown god means by being the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles is that she is trying to protect said natural order of the world. We assume that this order has been disturbed by the traveling siblings who travel from world to world. Why are the twins disturbing the natural order of the world, you ask? My theory is that because they are not native to Tevat, they are a disturbance to the world. Let me explain that better. Let's say you time travel to some era in the past. Since you do not belong to that era, you could alter the course of history altogether, making it perhaps better or even worse. The twins are doing the same thing, just not by time traveling, but by world traveling instead. Now, let's go to the meat and potatoes of the video, the good stuff. Something so meaty that will make you reject the almighty Boba sword and choose the path of the plot instead. The actual lore of the video. Oh, and from here on out I'll be referring to the unknown god as Sustainer of Heavenly Principles more often. That name just sounds way better than the unknown god. But I suppose that is to be expected since it was Paimon who called her that for the first time. The nicknames she gives usually suck. Except for Tone Deaf Bard. That one is pretty good. Maybe we should call the Sustainer something like that as well. Let me think... Guardian of the Galaxy. Hey, that's actually pretty good. I'll pat myself on the back for that. No, is it too cringe? Ah, whatever. Let's just continue with the video. Now lads, what if I told you that an unknown god exists in our world as well? Meet the unknown god of Greek mythology, rightfully named in Greek as Agnostos Theos, which means unknown god. That's what it means. It doesn't have a name. It's unknown after all. In fact, in Athens, there was a temple specifically dedicated to an unknown god, and Athenians would often swear in the name of the unknown god. god? Who is the unknown god? Well, I suppose that is a rhetorical question, huh? In the book of Acts in the Christian New Testament, when the Apostle Paul visited Athens, he saw an altar dedicated to that unknown god. He was invited to give a speech to the Athenian elite and stated that said form of worshipping was wrong, because the God who made the world, referring to the Christian God, does not live in temples made by humans, as if he needed anything from them. The Jewish God could not be named, and as such, it's possible that Paul's Athenian listeners misunderstood his speech about the unknown God. The Greeks might have thought that Paul was introducing a new God to them. However, Paul's God was instead a God that the Greek people already worshipped as the unknown God. Furthermore, on the Palatine Hill of Rome, an altar dedicated to an unknown deity was discovered in 1820. On the altar one can read, whether sacred to God or to goddess, Gaius Sextius Calvinus, son of Gaius Preda, restored this on a vote of the Senate. What does this have anything to do with the unknown God and Genshin, you ask, and rightfully so. Just like the Greeks' unknown God, the Sustainer too is a god that the people of Teyvat already worship, or at least they did in the past. It's thought that the inscription on the altar dedicated to that unknown god is connected to the so-called Cylonian Affair. Cylon was an Athenian who planned a coup in 632 BC to seize power in Athens. However, this coup was opposed, and so Cylon and his followers took refuge in an Athenian temple. Now, you are thinking, just what does this Cylon lad have anything to do with the Sustainer? The thing is that Cylon and his brother managed to escape that Athenian temple, but his supporters did not, because they were ultimately cornered by Athens' 9 Archons. Let me just say that in ancient Greece, an Archon was not a god, but instead a political figure that governed. And the 7 Archons of Teyvat are just that. Sure, they are gods. They have divine powers and divine characteristics, like a cute appearance that makes me question my sexuality, a massive dong that makes all hot husbandos, not you, in Teyvat jealous, or even sheer thickness that can even pose a serious threat to Jin's already established reputation. But the Archons became, well, Archons when they took leadership over a certain nation in Teyvat. Before that, they were just gods, like all the others in Celestia. Remember when I said that Kylon's followers were cornered by the 9 Archons? Well, that doesn't have any connection to Genshin Impact, since there are only 7 Archons and not 9. Or are there? In Teyvat, there are 7 main elements. These elements have a respective god and a nation that worships them. However, what if I told you that is wrong? There are actually 9 main elements, but 2 of them were forgotten with the passage of time. What are these elements? What gods mastered them? It's actually relatively logical to get to these 2 mysterious elements. The 7 elements of Teyvat form the world, but they cannot do that by themselves. They need the help of 2 greater elements. Let me ask you, what does a plant need to grow besides water? What does a fire need to melt ice in order for this ice to become the water that flows into the oceans? And finally, what does water need to be turned into ice again? The answer is time and space. Without time, a plant can never grow, fire can never melt ice, and water can never freeze, because there is no change that comes with the passage of time. Additionally, without space, there can be no change either, because there is no place for it to happen. Basically, what I meant to say is that time and space are a primary element that influence all the other 7. This means that time and space need to be always present in order for life to exist. We already know, kind of, who the other Archons of the 7 elements are, but who are the 2 Archons of the remaining 2 elements? They are the God of Time and the God of Space. I mean, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? Maybe the title God of Time sounds familiar to you. The God of Time is a canonical god in Genshin who was once active in Mondstadt. For some unknown reason, their legacy was forgotten by Teyvat over time. In the end, the element that gave the God of Time life was the one that ultimately destroyed them. I guess you could say they got a taste of their own medicine. please kill me. Just like the God of Time, the God of Space's legacy was wiped out from Tevat's records. This leaves us with the following questions. Who was the God of Space? Actually, I prefer to call them the God of the Void. It sounds pretty similar, but way better. There is another reason as to why I like the name God of the Void more, but I'll get to it later. Why were they completely forgotten by Tevat? And finally, who is it that wiped out the God of Space from Tevat entirely? Luckily for you, dear viewers, these questions will not go unanswered today, because I can give you an answer. First and foremost, I just need to say that I will not go in more detail regarding the God of Time. This video is not about them after all. So let me answer the first question. Who was the God of Space? The God of Space was none other than the sustainer of heavenly principles herself. What the hell? Based on what evidence? Well, there are two main aspects that support my statement. The first one is that the sustainer is inspired by the Harsha of the Void from Honkai Impact 3rd. For those of you who don't know, characters in Genshin are heavily inspired by characters in MiHoYo's other game, Honkai Impact 3rd, and the sustainer is no different. Her design is incredibly similar to that of the Harsha of the Void. The Harsha of the Void can manipulate space-time, which when applied to Genshin Impact suggests that the two lost Archons have some kind of connection to one another. And that makes sense, since space can't exist without time and time can't exist without space either. Now, I know that other theories say that the sustainer is the God of Time. However, I believe that that is unlikely, since we have never heard anything about the God of Time that sounds similar to the sustainer and vice versa. So for now, it would be safer to assume that the God of the Void and the God of Time are two different individuals. Now, let me tell you the second aspect, the sustainer's powers. Aren't they weird? I mean, the only thing she does is summon blocks. Either there is a deeper meaning to it, or the devs have forgotten to make her powers something more appealing. In fact, the sustainer's abilities have a direct connection to her being the God of Space. Firstly, she is the only character that can teleport from one location to another, opening a large gate in space, in literally the middle of nowhere. Forget those characters that can teleport behind enemies when fighting, that doesn't count. Secondly, the sustainer summoning one of her blocks is her creating new space. See here? There is a stone floor. Now out of nowhere a block appears. This completely plain block is now an object that formed new space for new things to be created. It's like a white canvas. Even though it has a standard color, size and texture, from a simple white canvas you can create anything you want. This principle can work for the sustainer's blocks as well. As such, one simple block is an object with endless possibilities. Now it's time to answer the last two questions. Why was the God of Space forgotten by Tevat, and who eradicated her from Tevat's history? Something really terrible must have happened for the God of Space to meet such a fate. Something that marked the history of Tevat forever, yet something that everyone has forgotten about. Everyone except for the gods, because they were there when it happened. The destruction of Khaenri'ah. In the We Will Be Reunited story teaser, we saw exactly that. Additionally, we see the sustainer's blocks moving in the direction of the nation in flames. Remember what Dainsleif says when he's introducing Khaenri'ah?
Khaenri'ah was a nation without a god, not because it had a god that died or abandoned them, but because it never had a god to begin with.
What if I told you that that is wrong? Well, almost wrong. Indeed, Khaenri'ah never had a god, but it had the help of two gods in its creation, because even though that nation was built by humans themselves, the people of Khaenri'ah could have not created the nation without the help of two prime elements. I'm talking of course about space and time. This means that the god of the void and the god of time helped the people to build that powerful nation. It is therefore possible that they were directly or indirectly involved in the founding of Khaenri'ah. Khaenri'ah, however, became so powerful and so technologically advanced that it was showing the people of Tevat that they did not need the Archons to protect them. The sustainer of heavenly principles saw the existence of Khaenri'ah as a threat to the natural order of the world. Remember the heavenly principles of Chinese theology I mentioned in the beginning of the video? And so, fearing that Khaenri'ah could be the spark that would ignite the powder barrel of revolution against the Archons throughout the nations, the only solution the Sustainer could find was to destroy Khaenri'ah completely. And so, the God of the Void went to destroy Khaenri'ah. She saw this act as divine punishment for the nation for challenging the Archons, and she did so without consulting the rest of the gods. It's safe to say that the Archons were not pleased when they heard what she was doing, and so they went to Khaenri'ah themselves to stop the Sustainer and to save that nation. However, when they arrived there, it was already too late. They were not able to save the people of Khaenri'ah, and so the only thing they could do was to defeat the God of the Void. Feeling ashamed of this catastrophic event, the Archons decided to wipe the God of the Void out from history entirely. The God of the Void was forgotten with the passage of time, and after the catastrophe of the destruction of Khaenri'ah, there was no place in Teyvat for the God of Space anymore. In the end, she truly did become void. Oh, the irony. And since the God of Time did influence the annihilation of Khaenri'ah in some way, again directly or indirectly, the god was exiled from Mondstadt, the country that used to worship them. Being a god without worshippers, they eventually were forgotten. However, even though the majority of people were punished by the Sustainer for being rebels against the Divine, two individuals survived, Dainsleif and the Traveler's sibling, much like the case of Cylon and his brother, who were the only ones who escaped from that Athenian temple. Remember when I told you about that story? It is known that Dainsleif and Lumine, or Ether, depending on who you chose to play as. I chose Lumine, but that's simply because I'm a horny lad. Used to be partners, but because Dainsleif had failed to protect his homeland, Lumine, or Ether, blamed him, and so they went their separate ways. This theory explains why Dainsleif only mistrusts the gods and does not hate them. After all, the Archons were not responsible for the destruction of his homeland, but it was still a god who caused this catastrophe in the first place. Well lads, we have reached the end of the video. What are your thoughts? Do you think it is possible for the elements of space and time to exist in Genshin? Or were you completely put off when I called the Sustainer Guardian of the Galaxy? As I said before, I'm planning on doing more videos like this one in the future, so please leave a like and subscribe so that you won't miss any new theory videos when they come out. And hey, maybe you have a friend who'd like this kind of content as well. Why don't you share this with them? Get them right into this discussion. Lastly, if you are already subscribed, I'd like to give you a as thick as balls thighs thank you for being here. And if you are a returning viewer but you're not already subscribed, then that's basically the gods telling you that you should subscribe. If you have your own theory on who this unknown god may be, do not hesitate to tell me about that in the comments. Once more, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you very soon.